This part of the bow along will go through all the finishing touches that will make the bow not only aesthetically pleasing but also more durable so it can be used for years to come. First, I will prepare the tips for a tip overlay. I use my Shinto rasp to remove material in a manner so that I can glue on another piece of wood to reinforce the tips of the bow. I wouldn't say there is a precise angle you need to remove the wood at, just as long as you have a nice flat gluing surface when you're done. I then rough up the gluing surface with the blade of my crosscut saw to make a better gluing surface for the tip overlay. I use Purple Heart for the tip overlay material for this bow. Not only does it look great, but it is an extremely hard wood, which makes for a great tip overlay. I also rough up the bottom of the tip overlay with the edge of the saw blade as well. One thing you need to pay attention to when cutting your tip overlays is that the grain is oriented vertically with respect to the back of the bow. Otherwise, when you cut your string grooves in, you risk the string finding its way between a growth ring while shooting the bow. Don't ask me how I know this. I like to use this MT13 epoxy for my glue ups. It's a two-part epoxy that you mix evenly and it can apply in a very thin layer for a good strong joint. I use an alcohol wipe to clean the surface right before I do my glue up. I forgot to show it, but I take electrical tape and wrap it around the tip overlay to hold everything in place before letting it dry overnight. I use my draw knife to carefully remove the material from the sides of the tip and also a little from the top. This can be accomplished with a rasp. Once I have the tip shaped how I want it, I use my rat tail file to create the string groove so it's in line with the previous groove, making sure not to go all the way through the overlay material on the top side of the limb. I then use some sandpaper and go over the entire tip using a thin strip of paper and a shoe shining motion to get rid of any sharp edges so you don't risk cutting your string while using the bow. Next, I mark out the sight window to be cut out. I make an X cut that will intersect in the middle of the riser, cut to a depth that will allow me to have some material left so I can round the portion of the riser from the back of the sight window to the front. I use the same chisel and rubber mallet to do the bulk of the removal and then fine tune everything with a rasp and scraper. I now want to make the handle more comfortable by radiusing and rounding some of the edges so that the shooter's hand can better grip the bow. I make a slight pistol grip on the back side of the handle and also remove wood on both sides of the bow for thumb placement and to allow for the fingers to settle out closer underneath the arrow shelf. You can shape the handle in any way that is most comfortable to your hand. That's the best part of making your own bow. One of my favorite finishes to apply to a bow is just steel wool dissolved in vinegar. This gives the wood a grayish and even blackish finish depending on the wood. It will age the wood right before your eyes. In this picture, I have applied it to the bellies of 3 different bows, leaving the tips bare for a more natural look. Once this is dried, I start finishing the back of the bow. I use different leather dyes that I apply randomly over the back of the bow. Once all the dyes are applied, I use a lighter grit sandpaper to lightly sand over the back of the bow to blend the dyes and expose some of the back of the bow and some of the uneven areas. I also clean up the sides of the limbs with the sandpaper at this time. I also take an alcohol wipe and go over the entire bow. This takes any of the loose pigments and blends them all together, giving the bow a nice aged look that I really like. I then use a vintage gel from Thiebings to go over the whole bow with the exception of the tips. This fills in all the nooks and crannies and really makes the colors pop and gives a great contrast. After all is said and done, I apply 6 coats of shellac, allowing an hour in between each coat, sometimes longer, depending on the weather. After all 6 coats are applied, I let that dry for a day and then finish with 3 separate coats of polyurethane, allowing a day in between each coat for the whole thing to dry. This bow was built for a friend at work, and when I gave it to him, I could tell he appreciated it. That's the best part about making a bow, is giving it to somebody that you know will appreciate it and cherish it for as long as they have it.